Welcome to the latest episode of the Real World Nutrition Podcast. This is episode 241, Adequacy, Balance, Moderation, and Variety, the 4 pillars of a nourishing diet. Hi everyone, welcome to the latest episode of the Real World Nutrition Podcast. I am Shelly Rael, registered dietitian nutritionist, and the host of this podcast. So today's episode, I want to get into the core of a question that I hear all the time. How do I know if I'm getting exactly the right nutrients in exactly the right amounts? And it sounds like a reasonable question. If nutrition affects your health, it affects your energy, it affects your performance, it affects your long-term outcomes, then it makes sense to want some level of precision, a specific calorie target, a set number of grams of protein, a checklist of vitamins and minerals that you need. But here's where I usually start. Nutrition is not exact. And I don't just start there, I say it all the time. Nutrition is not exact. There is no precise number, there is no exact formula, and there's no one way to get this all right. There are ranges, there are averages, there are patterns. And once people understand that, I hope it changes people's approach to eating. It's sometimes hard for people to get to the core of that, but I do want to address that more. So first up, where do these numbers even come from? So when we say these numbers, so let's start with something simple here. What are we talking about, or where do these numbers come from when we're talking about calories that foods have? We will say a medium apple has about 80 calories. We'll say 2 tablespoons of peanut butter contain about 180 to 190 calories. But how do we know this? How do we know that? Some people just don't think about it, and when I say, how do we know that? They're like, well, we just know. No, we don't. Those numbers come from what we call food composition databases. And that's primarily maintained by the United States Department of Agriculture, or the USDA, through what we call Food Data Central. So how this works, researchers analyze samples of foods, so a bunch of apples, peanut butter, rice, chicken, anything that we would eat. And they test multiple samples and calculate average values for calories and nutrients. And the details of how this all works, I don't get bogged down on that. I just take it on faith, but no, there is processes of how this works. But when we find out this information and they enter it in this database, we get these averages. And that's what you see on a food label, you see in an app. That's why we say an average medium apple is 80 calories, but not every apple is exactly 80 calories. One might be 76 calories, one might be 83 calories. Growing conditions, storage, size, variety, all influence nutrient content. So even though I'm saying calories, all those other nutrients within the apple are going to vary based on each apple. Is small variances. So again, we look at averages. And even on packaged foods, we do have a margin of error. So if you see a label that says 120 calories, it's not exactly 120 calories. There's a margin of error there. So labels are based on a standardized calculation, not exact measurements of what's in that specific item. So we could take 20 packages of the same food, and even if it said 120 calories per serving, it might have a small variance. So that right there is from the start, we're working with estimates. We're working with gray areas. It's not exactly 120 calories or exactly 180 calories, but average overall, yes, it would be when we're talking about various things. And the other part of things is our bodies are not exact either. So not just saying that we have 20 people in a room and they're all different, we're talking about our individual needs day to day. our needs are not fixed. Your body's needs are not exactly the same every single day. You do not burn the same number of calories every day. Your activity changes, your sleep changes, your stress changes. Your intake from the previous day can influence your hunger today. If you ate more yesterday, you may not be as hungry today. If you underate, your body may push you to eat more. Again, things change. Nutrient recommendations, like the recommended dietary allowance, what a lot of people call the RDA, so that's recommended dietary allowance, is based on population averages. So it's designed to meet the needs of most people, not provide a precise prescription for you as an individual. So now we have two layers of variability. The food we eat, not exact. We go on averages. Your estimated needs of not just calories, but all the nutrients, not exact. Even if you do have the same lifestyle every single day, how boring are you? But more of just things change. We, might have a slight temperature. There's just so many variances that we can't even begin to count them all. And trying to match our calorie intake or the foods and micromanaging that and trying to match it with exactly how many calories we are burning per day can be exhausting and wholly unnecessary. Unnecessary. And I know people have their wearables and they have all these things to track things. It's still, if you want to do that, fine. But don't take it as gold standard exactness, because that's not how it works. Nutrition is about patterns. So instead of focusing on exact numbers, it's more helpful to look at patterns. I say this all the time. You may be sick of hearing it, but I say it all the time. One meal does not determine your health. One day does not determine your health. It is what you do consistently over time that matters more. So when we zoom out, we can focus on a few key characteristics that define a nourishing diet. And these are often referred to, as the 4 pillars. So the 4 pillars: adequacy, balance, moderation, and variety. So let's get to each one of these individually. So adequacy. What does adequacy mean when it comes to nutrition? It means getting enough energy, getting enough protein, getting enough essential fats, vitamins, minerals, and fiber. And this is critical because this is often overlooked, especially when someone is trying to lose weight. Eating less does not automatically mean eating better, because if intake is too low, it can affect our energy. It can affect our ability to recover, not just from an exercise bout, it could be from sickness, from an illness, from all kinds of things. If energy intake is too low, it can affect our overall health negatively. So adequacy is about meeting your basic needs so your body has what it requires to function. And some people have this idea that going low is better, but no. We want to create a calorie deficit, but if we go too low, we can have problems. So next up in these 4 pillars is balance. So we want to look at proportions of nutrients. So are you getting a mix of carbohydrates, protein, and fat? Are you including different food groups? If most of your intake comes from one category or cuts out an entire food group, it's very likely something is missing. So I say that a lot. If people are only focused on eating protein, they could be missing out on other nutrients because that displaces other foods. But we also want to look at this balance from the perspective of meals. So even in a meal, we want to include carbohydrate, protein, and fat together to help with satiety and more stable energy levels. Let's just say we don't We do talk protein, carbohydrate, and fat, but we mostly eat foods, and the nutrients happen to be in the foods. So I just say, what are those food groups you're including on your plate? And that's where, when we had the My Plate for so many years, the pyramid was not something that was used since 2011. The very, very simple framework of the My Plate was very helpful. And in fact, we used that a lot in nutrition education way before it even became the official food icon that was used. And that was the framework, the plate, half the meal being fruits and vegetables. And then we had protein foods and we had whole grains, not because it was exact, but it just helps give a visual guide for the proportion of our meals being those different food groups. So next up is moderation. And moderation is about not overdoing certain components. So moderation can be addressing sugar, or more specifically, added sugars, saturated fat, sodium, and alcohol. Now, moderation does not mean elimination. It means keeping things within a range that fits in the overall pattern. And we don't even want to suggest eliminating added sugars completely, or saturated fat, or even sodium completely, because really it's virtually impossible. You can include foods that are lower in those nutrients, lower in the saturated fat, as long as we're using healthier fats in place of it, minimizing added sugars, minimizing added sodium. So the key here is we want to keep in mind how often and how much we're having these things relative to everything else. So that's why I say a little bit of added sugar is not a big deal if the overall eating pattern is pretty darn good. If somebody's only intake is added sugars and foods with added fats and added sodium, that's more problematic. But if it's here and there, not a big thing. And then the fourth pillar, this one gets overlooked a lot, is variety. And variety is including different foods to provide different nutrients. So let's give some examples here. Spinach and carrots are both vegetables, but they're not the same nutritionally. Black beans and lentils are both legumes, but they offer different combinations of nutrients. So we want to have variety, not just having a variety of food groups, but a variety within our food groups. So including a range of foods increases the likelihood that you're meeting your nutrient needs without having to track every detail. And this is something I've still not been quite successful in doing this, and I have to look back and find where I read this, is we want to aim for 35 different foods per week. So we're not saying 35 meals, different foods, but a lot of people get stumped by this because they tend to have the same thing for breakfast, same thing for lunch. And if you have 5 things for breakfast, but you have those same 5 things every day, you're still only getting 5 different foods. So that's where, again, I don't want people to get hung up on this, but this is where we want to consider variety. And even more importantly, a wider variety of plant foods helps support our gut health because it helps support a more diverse microbiome. So we don't need to have a variety of vegetables or a variety of foods at every single meal. Like I did say, we want to have those fruits, vegetables, whole grains, protein foods, dairy or dairy alternatives throughout the day. But doesn't mean you have to have 6 different vegetables at each meal. It's okay to have the consistent go-to options. If we want to have the same thing for breakfast every day, that's okay, but we want to make sure we're getting variety in other parts. So over the course of a week, we want to find that variety. Now I want to address calorie control, because this is often the one that people focus on the most. And calorie control does not mean tracking everything that goes into our mouth. It means that over time, intake aligns with your needs. If intake is consistently higher than nutrient needs, weight may increase. But then on the flip side, if it's consistently too low, energy and health can suffer. And because I said earlier at the beginning that both the food and our body are variable, calorie control works best when viewed over time, not in a single day. So I have people who just solely focus on the day to day to day to day to day, and they don't see the pattern of how things are trending. So if somebody sees a 2-pound weight gain over a matter of 3 days, but if we look at once a week over the months, the weight may be going in the direction they want it to be. And the other thing to consider here in this is your hunger, fullness, energy levels. Overall trends provide useful feedback. If somebody's consistently hungry, we would have to look at the calories that they're getting in and what might need to be tweaked there. People are feeling fuller if they're feeling low energy. What's going on, and does something need to be addressed? So, with all this, let's consider these things. When people ask how to get exactly the right nutrients in exactly the right amounts, it's a desire to make sense. We want things to fit in just so. But again, nutrition just does not work this way. The numbers we rely on are estimates, are ranges. Your needs vary. Your body adapts. So instead of chasing exactness, focus on those patterns. Are you getting enough? That's adequacy. Is your intake balanced? Are you practicing moderation? Are you including variety? Now, some people, when I mention that 35 different foods a week, they get hung up on that. Just use it, play it as a game. Don't get obsessed. Pay attention and maybe say, hey, are we getting variety? Am I getting variety? Is your overall intake aligned with your needs over time? So your approach does not need to be rigid to be effective. It just needs to be consistent, but also flexible. And that's where, when I talk about sustainability in nutrition, that's what I'm talking about. Something that you can do consistently over time without saying, I'm on a diet today and then I fell off. And then I'm back on my diet and now I fell off again. No, sustainable nutrition is being able to eat and enjoy things along the way because you appreciate the pattern of eating. And those changes over time. All right. Hopefully this made some things more clear for you, or if it's something you've heard people talk about, you can share that with them. But if you take anything away from this episode, let it be this. You do not need to get everything right. You need to get the overall pattern working for you. And that's what supports our health, both physical and mental, over time. All right, everyone, with that, as I indicated, if you know somebody who's been talking about some of these things that I talked about or addressed in this episode, share it with them. Tell them, hey, here's some information that might be helpful for you. Not everybody has to agree on all aspects of things, but hopefully this framework helps them better understand and have more flexibility, not just them, but to you as well. All right, with that, everyone, that's it for this week's episode. If you want to read more about this information, as always, I have a link in the show notes for the blog that correlates or is related to this week's episode. And with that, you take care and bye for now.